Hello and welcome to the Smells Like Infinite Sadness podcast. I'm your host, Michael Taylor. For those of you who don't know, I run the website, smellslikeinfinitesadness.com. It's a blog covering the best alternative rock from the 80s and 90s up to present day. I'm a proud middle-aged Gen Xer who is still obsessed with the music of his youth and loves to talk about it. And today I'm speaking with Dave Trumfio, the songwriter and vocalist for synth-pop duo the Pulsars. Chicago-based Pulsars are one of the first bands to bring back an 80s retro sound on their 1997 self-titled debut. This album appeared years before the post-punk revival of the early 2000s when bands like the Interpol and the Killers became indie music darlings. The Pulsars' debut album was chock full of new wave gems like My Pet Robot, Silicon Teens, and Technology. And while they received some initial success and high-profile tours with bands like Oasis, the dissolution of the record company heralded the end of the band, and their album went out of print for almost 30 years. But now they're back, and they're releasing a remastered edition of this album on vinyl, CD, and digital on September 13th via Tiny Global Productions. This is a real treat for hardcore fans. It should also appeal to electronic music fans who are unfamiliar with their work. On today's episode, I speak to Trumfio about his memories of the band's initial success, Chicago alternative scene of the 1990s, his work as an in-demand producer for artists like the Jesus and Mary Chain, why the band are finally reissuing their debut album, their upcoming tour, and much more. So enjoy the chat, and be sure to stick around afterwards. I'll be playing a track off the album. I'm a big fan of your first album, or the album, which is what we're going to discuss today. Yeah. So I'll just go ahead and launch right into it. My first question is, why, one, did it take you so long to get the rights to your album, your self-titled album that came out? Was it 96 or 97?
Yeah, the album, the one, our first record came out in 1997.
97.
Yeah, we were active as a band pretty much from about 93, 94 to 99. And the one record came out in 97.
So what was the process in getting the rights back to the recording? And has it been recently? Is that why you're deciding to release it now? That you finally were able to get your hands on that, or how did that come about?
Well, it was a pretty it's kind of a long story. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it took a while just for contractual reasons. We had to have a lawyer write letters. Basically, when Herb and Jerry closed Elmo Sounds, it got absorbed into Universal. And I don't know what the reason is, but I believe one of the big reasons they folded the label is because they didn't really like where the music industry was going with streaming and iTunes starting. So unfortunately, they decided to close the label, and as a result, our catalog got shelved because we didn't really move on to Universal or sign a new deal after that, because my brother Harry decided he wanted to take some time to finish his school, college, and I was producing records. So we decided at that time, it was like the end of 99, beginning of 2000, that we were going to put the band just on hold. And the result was we just never were put into streaming, and we were literally shelved. Our first record was never available in the modern world.
And, one thing that came to mind when I was preparing for this interview, I listened to the album again, and I had it, back in the day. And what I think is amazing, like songs like Silicon Teens or Lifeboat, Das Lifeboat, or My Pet Robot. To me, they still sound really fresh. They still sound relevant. How do you think it holds up today, just from your perspective of having recorded it and lived with it for so long?
I mean, the joke's always been we were 5 years too early or too late.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, like, at the time, grew up being a kid from the kind of like getting into early new wave and the original punk scene, punk bands of like the late 70s, early 80s, huge influence on me as a musician, songwriter, producer. But obviously then, indie rock happened in the early 90s, and, I fell in love with bands like Pavement and, obviously the kind of proto-indie bands like Pixies, Surfer Rosa, and those kind of albums. And so I think like the Pulsars were kind of a amalgamation of all that, we wore our new wave influences on our sleeve. And nobody was doing like the new wave revival other than few people at the time, like, a few bands, like Rentals being one.
Yeah.
Or like Stereo Lab. Stereo Lab actually used synthesizers. I felt like, just being in bands and and producing records in the 90s indie scene, it was like not many people had keyboards in their bands. Like, it wasn't cool to use keyboards, or if you used keyboards, you were more electronic, like a rave kind of dance artist. So there weren't that many bands kind of using guitars and keyboards in the way that we were using it. Bands like the Rentals and Stereo were. So I feel like somehow by just the fact that we weren't doing what other people were doing in the 90s, like, it kind of aged well. Like, I think I'm so pleasantly surprised. Like, when I hear it now, it's like I play it for kind of younger people, and they're just like, "Oh, this could like come out like right now." And I'm like, "Oh, well, it is. It is coming out right now." Yeah. Literally, it's not. It hasn't been out. It came out. It came out in the 90s. Was on CD, never on vinyl, never went to streaming. I mean. For all intents and purposes, this is the first release of the record, as far as the way I see it in the modern world.
Do you was that frustrating to you when you saw so many bands like in the early 2000s? The whole like post-punk revival, or you kind of like, we were doing this first, and was that, or were you like, well, we were ahead of our time? Sometimes it's not always great to be ahead of your time as far as like commercial success. Critical success usually follows, but was that frustrating to you, where like, were you kind of like, well, we were the first and that's cooler anyways, that everybody else kind of came after us with that sound?
Yeah, I mean, it was, to be honest, yeah, I was pretty frustrated in the early 2000s. I mean, as a producer, I ended up working with a lot of bands. I ended up working with the Rentals. Late 90s, like even while I had the Pulsars, I recorded the first anniversary record, Designing a Nervous Breakdown, which was very synth guitar based. And then, went on to like, even like in the last 10 years or so, I've been doing some of the post-punk bands, like work with Moving Units, and did a record with the band Soft Kill. So like my influences and the fact that I kind of was an early to the table on the punk rock, post-punk revival, new wave stuff. I've always done it as a producer in the studio. But yeah, we never really got any recognition past like when the kind of couple years our record was out. And, there are some great reviews and there's some great critical acclaim for the record. At the time, it just never really carried on. And unfortunately, I decided to kind of focus on my production career. My brother decided to go back to school, and we just never kind of relit the match till now.
So was it basically, once the record company Almo Sounds was that imploded, at pretty much signal like the end of the group at that time? Was what the kind of the what precipitated that, or was that unrelated and you guys kept going and just something else was the cause of it just kind of petering out?
No, it was strictly like the fact that our record deal went away. It just people were like, "Oh, did you get dropped?" Like, no, the record company literally went out of business. And at that point, there was some talk of like, obviously we were like, "Hey, do we move to another label?" We talked to a few labels. And at the end of the day, my brother, who was half the band, he plays drums, was like, "Look, I'm not ready to get back in a van and kind of, go back to an indie label and not really having any tour support and kind of doing the regular band slog." He was just like, I'm going to go finish my degree and let's just circle back. And that kind of just turned into like a 25-year hiatus.
Yeah.
I never left doing music. I played a lot. I played in a band called the Mekons.
Oh yeah.
They've been around 1977. I'm their bass player. I've been working with them on and off as a producer and like kind of like a deputy member since the early 90s. Even during the Pulsars, I would still working with the Mekons. But in 2015, I officially joined as the bass player. So, I've been doing that. I actually played in Moving Units for a second. We did a tribute to Joy Division record, and I've done a few other projects under the name Victor Fiction, which I did a couple EPs that are very post-punk, kind of electronic post-punk stuff, a little dark wave. So yeah, I mean, I never really stopped doing music, but the Pulsars did.
So, I was reading in the press release, and I wasn't aware that you guys opened up for like Oasis and Blur and a bunch of different bands. Do you kind of have fond memories of that time when things were kind of moving in an upward direction? Do you have like any particularly crazy memories as far as all those tours and just the kind of environment of the 90s alternative scene at that time?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just like, kind of out of nowhere. Like, Harry and I played in a lot of different bands before the Pulsars, and did our time slugging away playing clubs and stuff. And when we decided to start the Pulsars, it was kind of like, look, let's just do this, me and you. Let's program this like synths. Oh, it's not cool to use the synths like every other band. Hey, let's use the synth. Like, maybe we'll have a little bit. So Harry and I were just like, it was this kind of a guilty pleasure project for us. We're like, look, we're just going to write really short pop songs and like have synths. And before we knew it, and just be a duo. So we would go out and some of our early shows, a bunch of like agents and promoters saw us playing and like, hey, you guys are a two-piece. You set up at the front of the stage. Like, we kind of somehow got like, hey, these guys would be perfect to open up for Oasis. These guys would be perfect to open up for Blur, because like we don't really disturb the back line. And we're kind of a two-piece before a two-piece band was kind of in, like what we were before White Stripes stuff, So, I mean, that was kind of like a very novel thing, I guess. And for booking agents and promoters, it was like, hey, get the Pulsars. Like, they're in and out. So, yeah, I mean, the whole trajectory of the band was very fast and exciting. And we went from like basically putting a 7-inch out to like having a record deal within a year and, playing local club gigs to like opening up for Oasis and Blur and going and touring with Weezer. And I mean, we did a bunch of tours with Chibo Mato and Manor Astroman.
Oh, yeah.
So we were really busy. Like from that like 95 to like 98, like we were probably out over 200 days a year playing shows and recording. And we recorded a second record, it never came out. So they basically dropped the bomb that they're closing the label when we were like finishing our second record. And then for different legal reasons, like that never came out and we never got it, but now we have it. So, yeah, I mean, there's awesome fun times like introducing Cynthia Plastercaster to the Gallagher brothers. That was pretty fun. That's a whole story on itself. But yeah, it was pretty cool. It's. I mean, I guess when Elmo closed and we were already kind of going at it for about 6-7 years, it was like kind of like that time, like, hey, we had a good ride. Like, do we really want to like do some other stuff at this point, or do we want to like go to a smaller label? And we had some great offers at the time, but I guess after kind of coming off, like, I mean, that was like pretty much fresh off of touring with like Weezer on the Pinkerton tour around that time, so it was just kind of like, we kind of need a break, and not, unfortunately, the break was 25 years, but yeah, I mean, it was a fun ride while it lasted.
And along those lines, reading more about the press release and knowing your history as a producer in Chicago before you even were, in the Pulsars, do you have a lot of connective tissue to other Chicago bands, and do you feel kind of a lineage with other like Chicago alternative bands of that era, or were you kind of in your own camp and didn't really interact that much?
Kind of both. Yeah. I mean, some of like the band we had before the Pulsars, one of the bands, we played like the first 3 Smashing Pumpkins shows that they ever. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we didn't go to the same high school, but we were in the same kind of the kids in high school. He was at the high school next, the town over, with James Eha, who ended up, joining Smashing Pumpkins. And then, those early shows. So I knew him from like high school days, and those early shows, met Billy and kind of saw them go from like, sounding kind of like the Cult, like the first few shows. Like we played, I think we played 3 shows. So the first 2, they were very kind of almost like a little more shoegaze, like played Roland jazz course amps and kind of had like a very kind of Cult kind of sound. And
like a love era.
Yeah. And like even like She's Self Sanctuary kind of stuff. And and then one day, like they're starting to gain traction, and there was a very finite, like, okay, this is the show you guys are opening, like we're headlining, National Pumpkins headlining. And like we showed up and they were finishing their sound check, and they had Marshall half stacks and like an SVT. And I think they just started recording with Butch Vig and kind of getting wind of like the whole Sub Pop single stuff going on. This would have probably been like 88, 89, somewhere pretty early. And we're like, holy shit, they sound like Bachman Turner Overdrive. Like to us, like that kind of like grunge sound. And like, it was still the 80s. It was like just starting to happen. We're like, what the hell is going on here? We were like completely baffled. But that was the last time I played with them. So, and then, I mean, some of the early stuff I did, I worked with like Liz Phair really early on, way before Exile and Guy. Like maybe she just started working on that and played in a band called Ashtray Boy, and we ended up collaborating with her on stuff. Ashtray Boy was like a collaboration with me, my friend Jay, and Randall Lee, who's an Australian indie pop guy from the Cananes, in a band called Nice. So started like that kind of did that, and then worked on like a lot of early stuff with the band The Handsome Family. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
I think I've heard the name, but not the music.
Yeah, they're a really great band, and they're still going at it. I mean, they're putting out records. Like they're probably like 12 records in. They're they're a great dark kind of, I would almost say like goth country, but they're very more traditional, like very much like kind of murder ballads. And it's Brett and Rennie, husband and wife, and Rennie writes these crazy lyrics that are amazing, like just super, sometimes really funny, sometimes super dark and demented. And then Brett sings in like a super low baritone. And so worked with them early on. They're still going. And then kind of went in, did a lot of indie rock. Number One Cup. Are you familiar with Number One Cup? Any chance?
Mm-mm.
Oh, they were on. Yeah, they were, signed to a Seattle label called, I think, Fly Daddy was the name of the label. They're very cool, kind of proto, like indie, kind of proto indie pop, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I mean, I guess maybe I wasn't working right with all the bands. I mean, we were just all kind of parallel, and there were a lot of bands. And then, somewhere along the line, Jeff Tweedy from Wilco kind of was digging what the Pulsars were doing, and when they were getting ready to go in the studio for Summer Teeth, they wanted to use more synths and stuff, and we ended up I ended up working on that record and the Wilco and Billy Bragg record with Woody Guthrie lyric, Mermaid Avenue too. So yeah, so that happened. That was kind of parallel with the Pulsars. I was still doing Pulsars. Even then worked with like early My Morning Jacket. That would have been around 99. Worked on their second record. And then I moved to Los Angeles.
So with this re-release, I know it mentioned to be remastered. I was listening to it. I can kind of hear it. It's maybe a little rough around the edges at some parts. Was that intentional? And what all did you decide to do with like the mixing of it this time that you felt was lacking, perhaps? the last time? Was it not quite the way you envisioned it?
Yeah. So, like the technology that we used to record the record, we were one of the. So when we got our record deal, we actually spent like a lot of money on. I think it might have been the first Pro Tools system in Chicago. And so
oh wow,
I was really early to it. I think we bought it in 1995. It was like, pretty early, Pro Tools. So, and at that time, they just had these removable drives that only could get like 100 megabytes, like per drive. So like literally we would like have each song would have its own at 16-bit. So the technology was pretty raw. We used the 24 track and we would sync it up with the Pro Tools. So just by the nature of the technology, it's like a little bit rough around the edges. And we don't really have the full master. So we can't, because the way we backed up the drives were on these like DAT tapes. They're not DATs though, they're called DDS tapes. And then later a tape called AIT tape. And they're very finicky now. We tried to get the info off of it, and we have to use like a computer from like the 90s. So unfortunately, we don't have complete masters. We have the analog masters and we have like parts of the digital masters. So we weren't able to like fully remix the record. So what we ended up doing is I have all the digital mixes saved in retrospect. I able to pull it back. And I just looked at the notes we had, and I know like through the process of working with the label, we would always kind of go just a little further with some things. And like, for instance, a bunch of the songs use this Vox Phantom bass that has like a built-in Maestro fuzz, and it's a bass. So yeah. So like on the horses, like for instance, like on Wisconsin or Tunnel Song Technology, there's like this very low lumbering fuzz, and it's just basically me doubling all the root note with the bass on the rhythm guitar through the Vox fuzz. And we loved it so much we kind of turned it up, and to me it just sounds like the craziest My Bloody Valentine, like what they probably wanted it to sound, but it sounded really thin on their records. But like I was like, wow, I can make this sound super fat, and like I call it the like Sonic Albatross, So I'm like, yeah, let's turn up to the Sonic Albatross. So like the mixes we liked had the Sonic Albatross, and they were panned left and right, and it just sounds like giant, like coming at you. And at the time, like the label was like, oh, that's a little crazy. We don't want to use that, So for this version of the record, we're just like, hey, we're just going to use the ones we starred are the ones we're going to use. So we just went through the mixes, and these are the ones that are on this version of the record are basically, I would call it like a director's cut. It's basically the ones we wanted. A lot of them have a couple little extra overdubs, or maybe they're a little more extreme in one way, whether it's being raw, like, hey, we want this to be more raw. He made it, we tend to lean towards the more raw or more exciting versions. So that's what we did. We took all those, and then I remastered it, and I'm really happy with the remaster. The technology that like in the last 25 years is really great, especially in the digital side. The ability to kind of get in and sonically enhance and fix some things like sibilance on a vocal, or just the depth of perception. I just think if you A/B it to the original mastering and mixes to the new, it's kind of night and day to me. I'm really happy with it. And the fact that it is going to be the official streaming in the modern world version, I'm pretty happy. But yeah, we weren't able to remix. They're the actual mixes from the 90s, just remastered.
But the main component was the bass. You think the Sonic Albatross that was what really,
I think
it was that kind of the most prominent change.
I think we were talked into like turning it down or taking it out on most songs, And then there's songs like Lucky Day Part 1. There's more effects and stuff on it. The original one, which is more raw and dry, Like this one has more like almost like a John Lennon slapback that we put on it. So that's different. Silicon Teens, I think that's one of the other mixes, but it's pretty similar to the one that was on there. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to get the record and go, "Hey, this isn't the record," because it's the record. It's the same songs. I mean, it's just little things like on Tunnel Song. There's a background part on there that wasn't on the original mix. There's the albatrosses are a little louder. I don't think the albatrosses were even in the first. That's what I'm calling the Vox Fuzz bass, but they weren't even in the version on the first album. So it just sounds bigger and heavier sounding, and not a like metal way, more just like, I don't know, like a My Bloody Valentine way or something, you know. So yeah, and there's like an extra keyboard riff on the chorus on Tunnel Song. Tunnel Song is probably the most different than the original. I mean, That's Lifeboat, I'm pretty sure that's just a mix we like. I think I had the horns turned up louder or something. Less strings, more horns. So, I mean, but it's really subtle stuff. It's really subtle stuff. And I think, it only makes the first version of the record on the CD. They're only on CDs and they're floating around out there. Only makes that more a special thing, its own thing.
And, I notice a lot of bands that are kind of in your boat as far as like a nice cult following when they came out, but they weren't huge. Bands like Failure or Slow Dive come to mind, and then they break up. And then over the years, this fan base starts to develop of younger fans who discover it. Have you found that with your music? Do you ever hear like from younger fans who are like, they just, discovered you and they think like you're like the coolest new band, and you're like, this is from like over, almost 30 years ago or 20 years ago? Have you ever gotten any responses like that?
The first official release, other than the Lost Transmissions we did a couple years ago, which is just a bunch of outtakes and B-sides. This is actually, we're going to see. I mean, this is the official reissue of the record, and we're treating it like it's a new record. And, thanks for meeting with me, and we're going to be talking to people and just trying to get it out there. YouTube, there is quite a bit of stuff on YouTube. None of that's posted by us. So that's all fan driven posts. And I've noticed through the years, like, there's more and more younger people discovering it, and liking it and being really into it. And we get a lot of messages, over the years. I mean, I wouldn't say like tons, but, at least like once or twice a month, I'll get like a really enthusiastic message to our Facebook or Instagram. And, I'd be like, I'm just excited that it's being heard. And now that we're actually reissuing it, it's going to be on streaming. We're putting out vinyl. The vinyl is selling really well. I think we're almost sold out of the pre-sale. And I think there's going to be a whole rebirth of the band. Hopefully, we're going to be playing some shows this fall and just kind of doing it. Yeah. So I'm Failure, love them. I Slow Dive. I saw Slow Dive recently. They're amazing.
Me too.
I can only hope to be on their level. I can only hope that people will actually go and see the shows and be able to fill some rooms.
So what shows do you have lined up so far?
Well, actually, we're confirming this week. Nothing I can announce other than Risers Fest, which is in Charleston, West Virginia. They're taking over the whole town. They're doing like a town takeover over a weekend. It's October 11th to the 13th. And we'll be playing 3 shows. We're playing each day. 2 like theaters, 2 theater shows, and then 1 in-store at like the record store in Charleston. Still getting all the details on that. And then there's going to be, I think right now we have slated, we haven't announced it yet, but I think we're going around 11 or 12 shows kind of surrounding the festival. Locking down a Chicago date. Going to be playing in Dallas, and Birmingham, hopefully, and Cleveland. And we're gonna do some Southern California shows before we kind of head out to the Midwest.
Nice. And I was also going to say, now that this is getting a a nice proper release, um, has there been any talk about doing like another album, like of new material, or is that something that you're doing, or you're just kind of a wait and see thing? You're going to see how the tour does and how the album does, or do you have something in mind already?
Well, yeah, I mean, we already have like a whole release schedule planned. So when we were signed, I was constantly writing. We actually have 5 albums worth of material.
Oh
Yeah,
wow!
yeah. So we have our EPs, which are, we're probably gonna put all into one package. That will be like one full length worth, or maybe even more. Might be even a double album, depending on how we package it. And then we have the second record that was never released, which is done and it's ready to roll. Harry and I recorded a third album in around 2008, 2009. He and I were working with William Reed from Jesus and Mary Chain. And so we were actually doing a solo record with William that turned into their record that came out in 2017. But that kind of got the spark going with me and Harry to like record more. And so we ended up kind of breaking away and starting a third Pulsars record in that time. And then we have an ambient record, because like the early shows and our early EPs had a lot of ambient stuff. So like between songs, we'd have like kind of like, and I might do this for the new shows, but just segues between songs that would be very kind of they're ambient pieces. So we have an whole album of ambient stuff that we're going to put out, and also a covers record that we have. We probably have around 16, 17 covers. So that was done for various reasons, and we're going to package it into like a real tight 10 or 12 record.
So just out of curiosity, what was it like working with the Jesus and Mary Chain? What was that experience like?
It was really cool. It was really cool. I mean, they're one of my favorite bands from when I was growing up. So, I mean, Psycho Candy, I had the poster above my bed, I was that guy, So getting to be able to work with them was insane. And I started by working with William, and we started doing a solo record. And then somewhere along the way, like Coachella gave them an offer to play, and William and Jim got back together, and kind of, everybody knows the long-winded stories of the brotherly feuds in rock and roll. And they were one of them. And so somewhere along the line, the solo record turned into to the record, the Jesus and Mary Chain. So yeah, it was great working with them. I worked with them probably right up to the Coachella shows, and they kind of went off and did a bunch of stuff, and then they put the record on hold, and we never really circled back. And they finished the record with Youth from Killing Joke, but that was like
that's right. Forward. That's right.
Yeah. It's Damage and Joy. Is that the name of the record? I think I'm totally. Damage and Joy. Yeah,
no, that's it.
Yeah. So like a bunch of the songs on there were started with me and Harry and I. And
very cool.
I think Harry might be playing drums on one or two of them. Some of the rhythm tracks made it to it, but so yeah, that was a great time.
Well, I think it's really cool that you've had this whole other experience just beyond being the band of your production experience. That's something that I didn't know, so that was really cool to learn about. But I'm really excited that you guys are back. I still think that album sounds great. I listened to it the past couple of days. It totally put me right back to the mindset of like 1997 and just chilling out in my apartment listening to this album.
Thank you.
I hope you guys can make it. Yeah, I hope you guys can make it to Austin sometime. That would be really cool. If you ever do, I definitely will be there. But
we're definitely planning. We're definitely planning on it. This time around, we're going to be flying to Dallas because I have some friends there. Dylan Silvers plays in a band called Daryl. You know the band Daryl by any chance? He's there. He plays with Polyphonic Spree, and he does stuff with.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, Dylan. He's one of the guitar players. Anyways, he's a good friend of mine. We've recorded a bunch of projects over the year. So he's going to kindly pull together a back line so we don't have to drive from LA. So we're going to start in Dallas and kind of go out and then come back to Dallas. And it just so happens my cousin's getting married in Dallas on the 20th. So there's a lot of reasons we're starting in Dallas, but I mean, we will definitely be back to play Austin and other parts of Texas. Hopefully I would stay in the winter. We're just going to try to get this fall run just to kind of dip our toe in the water and kind of get it going. And we plan on playing more. So hopefully we'll be in Austin.
Very cool. Well, I wish you luck with the re-release and hope to hear some other new music from you guys. And yeah, it's really been a pleasure to talk to you and kind of get some more insight into how this all came about. And yeah, so excited to see you guys come to Austin sometime. And yeah, glad you guys are back. It's been long overdue.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks to Dave Trumfio for taking out the time for this interview. As promised, we're ending with this episode with a track off their 1997 debut. And in this case, it's called Technology. It's one of my favorite songs off the album. Totally takes me back to being in my late 20s in 1997. So good times. So take a listen, enjoy. Until next time, stay safe and stay sane.